CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Kenya confirms first case of coronavirus, bringing total number of African countries with confirmed cases to 14. The African Union holds crisis talks over Libya conflict. And we meet the Nigerian who is a doctor by day and an artist by night. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. Zimbabwe moves to undo the controversial land reform program it implemented 2 decades ago. And in sport, disparity in football as North African countries become more dominant in continental tournaments. We begin here in Kenya, where the country has confirmed its first case of COVID-19. This brings the number of African countries with confirmed cases to 15. Kenya's health ministry said the patient travelled back to Nairobi from the US via London. She tested positive on Thursday, but had arrived in Kenya a week earlier. Ghana and Gabon have also reported initial cases, bringing the total number on the continent to 145. In Ghana, officials said 2 people arriving from Norway and Turkey tested positive for the coronavirus. Gabon says their case is a Gabonese male who arrived from France. Tunisia recently confirmed 7 new cases in the country, bringing the total number of infections to 14. Numbers for the rest of the continent remain unchanged. Well, South Africa earlier stated that it had 17 coronavirus cases, but has now dropped that number to 16. On Thursday, South Africa's Health Minister, Zweli Mkhize, held a press conference on COVID-19. Mkhize clarified to the public that one of the patients from the Free State province had tested negative by the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. The man had come into contact with a Chinese businessman who was the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in the country. Well, for more on this, we are now joined by Edward Kusewa, an economist and lecturer at St. Paul's University in Kenya. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Kusewa. Well, first off, should there be cause for panic with this first confirmed case in Kenya?
I think, first of all, there should not be cause for panic. But as you can see, there's been a lack of unpreparedness from our government. And that lack of preparedness and unpreparedness could cause some form of, anxiety amongst the people of this nation. I think since this virus started spreading, it's almost 2 to 3 months, and we should have prepared ourselves in advance and put all the necessary measures to be able to reduce and control in case, because eventually it was going to come one way or the other.
But as we speak, measures are being put in place. The Kenyan government has banned public gatherings and foreign travel. Would you say this is enough to curtail the spread of COVID-19?
Well, I think at the first, I think it's something to start with. When you start banning public events and public gatherings from happening, I think this is a right step in the right direction. But obviously more needs to be done in terms of testing kits, in terms of providing the necessary resources and tools to be able to help the citizenry fight this virus.
And well, your expertise obviously is the economy. How do you see the spread of the virus affecting trade and the economy in Kenya and wider afield on the continent?
Of course, there's a lot of risk as far as trade is concerned, because you must understand that what we are being faced is the risk of the supply side factors. There's a lot of demand for goods and commodities, but unfortunately, if then there's no supply, then it means the supply chains are cut off. So as far as trade and commodities are concerned, we may see a slump and a decrease in the supply side. Yeah.
Oh, what sort of supplies are you talking about? Are we talking about food here?
All commodities, all essential commodities. And this, as the weeks go by, we may see inflationary pressures around food commodities as people take advantage of the situation. And this is bound to happen.
When you say take advantage, you talk about people stockpiling.
Yeah, I mean, what happens in a situation of conflict or disaster is that there's a lot of hoarding of commodities.
Yes.
And that could be in form of even forex. It could also be in form of food commodities. And generally the supplies, people want to make more money. And businessmen always take advantage of this kind of situation. And I think the government has issued a warning not to take advantage of this conflict.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a bit more about the drop in markets across the continent this week. The Kenyan market is also trading in the red as we speak. I know this is a difficult question. How long do you think this is likely to last? And what would you say your projections are going forward?
Well, I think so far it's very hard for us to be able to understand how far control mechanisms are going to bring down that virus from spreading. And I think global markets have been in a decline because they cannot anticipate. If you look at all the fundamental and technical analysis that experts are putting across the country or across the global markets, then it's very hard for us to be able to tell by when. But I think there's a lot of efforts from all sectors and from all countries to try and bring down this virus to a check. And so long as it continues spreading, I think the question has been, how do you reduce the spread of corona? And that definitely affects global markets and the risks of financial markets from going down. And so there's going to be a global recession if this is not going to be contained within the next quarter.
How do you think Kenya stands with regard to other African countries on the continent? Do you think it's in a strong enough position to weather this storm of a virus?
Well, it depends on the kind of infrastructure and tools and resources that the government is going to give out to be able to control this virus. But it's a wait and see approach. I mean, there's a lot of effort from both the national and county governments. But I think controlling this virus basically is the financial resources and the muscles that any government has to be able to put in place and control this sickness.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your analysis of this situation. That was Edward Kusewa there, economist and lecturer at St. Paul's University in Kenya, on this day that we have in Kenya reported the first case of coronavirus. Thank you. Meanwhile, the Algerian government has ordered the closure of schools and universities in a bid to contain the spread of COVID-19. The country's Director of Health, Jamel Fouraa, has also discouraged all but necessary travel. Fouraa is also requesting Algerians abroad to reconsider visiting relatives back home for fear of exposing their relatives to the disease. While the government's other measures include a ban on spectators at sports events, as well as on political, social and cultural gatherings. Health authorities say the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Algeria has risen to 24, with 1 death.
I ask citizens to postpone their travels and not to go to countries with many cases. I ask that they only go when necessary, and if it is necessary, I ask that they take into consideration all precautionary measures. We advise citizens living abroad not to visit family at this time, because they might be ill and infect their families here, helping spread the virus on a national scale.
Countries in Africa have stepped up proactive measures and enhanced their capacity to test for COVID-19. Health authorities around the continent have bolstered their surveillance and readiness to tackle the virus. The continent has received help from China, which has remained steadfast in its distribution of open and factual information surrounding the virus. China Media Group has also been at the forefront in informing people across the world about the COVID-19 outbreak. In Zimbabwe, CMG journalist Gao Junya attended a radio talk show at Star FM to give more insight into the fight against the virus.
China has been helping some countries in Europe, as you have said, and what has it done so far to help Zimbabwe? You mentioned a bit on your visit to Wilkins Hospital. Can you elaborate? What has China done so far to help Zimbabwe fight or even prevent?
Let me start from China's help to Zimbabwe, and also I'd like to talk a bit more to other countries. There is this Chinese medical team who are based in Harare. They've been here since 1980s. They've been offering medical help in Paranatua Hospital, and actually they've joined local doctors to help to a response to possible outbreak of this virus. And also on that tour to that Wilkins Hospital, actually the Chinese ambassador was there, and he was doing this inspection of the facilities there, and in person, and he wants to know what can be done to upgrade it. And actually, I saw his secretary has taken down those problems, and I think they're going to provide fund to upgrade it, and they're also going to provide more medical supplies like the testing kits, like protective suits, things like this. Other issues like they've been discouraging Chinese travelers from China to come to this country, because if it's not urgent, yes, it's better to stay there.
And now to the latest global COVID-19 figures. China's top health commission says the country has passed its peak. Wuhan, where the outbreak began, reported a record low of 5 new cases on Thursday. The country's total number of confirmed cases is nearly 81,000. Over 70% of them have recovered, while over 13,000 are still receiving treatment. More than 3,000 people have died. In Hubei province, cities outside Wuhan have seen no new cases for over a week. Outside China, nearly 54,000 cases have been reported in more than 100 countries. Italy remains the hardest hit in Europe, confirming over 15,000 cases and over 1,000 deaths. It's followed by Iran with over 10,000 confirmed cases and over 400 deaths. South Korea has nearly 8,000 and 68 deaths. That's 8,000 cases and 68 deaths. In the US, over 400 new cases have been reported, bringing the national total to over 1,700. Regions, including Washington, D.C. and New York City, have declared a state of emergency. In the US, more than 300 new cases have been confirmed as of Friday. The total number now tops 1,700 cases. And though the president remains calm and confident, there have been questions and doubts over the US's testing process. Our correspondent, Sean Calebs, has more from Washington.
The questions are piling up faster than the spread of the coronavirus.
Mr. President, are you going to sign an emergency declaration? Mr. President, state leaders say they don't have enough tests. Why not?
U.S. President Donald Trump delivered his own prescription for weathering the COVID-19 pandemic.
Stay away from people and wash your hands and do all of the things that we're supposed to be doing a little bit anyway.
Health officials say there is no wishing this away. The big question remains, just how bad will it get? Lawmakers say they are fed up with rosy predictions and casting blame. Now, they say, is the time for answers and results.
Our testing process has been lacking. And of course, people are also frustrated. They can't find masks. They can't find sanitary wipes.
I am appalled and astonished that we have lost a critical 2 months. There's still no plan, no strategy for testing, for ventilators, for the basics that are required for people to survive. We're talking about life and death.
It doesn't help that President Trump continues to say the United States has, quote, tremendous testing set up. His top health officials say the nation simply is failing to provide adequate COVID-19 testing. At best, some 10,000 Americans have been tested, while in South Korea, a country that has a fraction the size of the United States, 210,000 people have been screened, with 20,000 more undergoing tests each day. And what can be called egregious errors are coming to light in the U.S.
So we could have people in the United States dying for what appears to be influenza when in fact it could be the coronavirus or COVID-19.
Some cases have been actually diagnosed that way in the United States today.
Lawmakers are trying to find common ground for a congressional relief measure. Right now, both Democrats and Republicans say they need to put political differences aside, but so far they can't. The nation is waiting for a coordinated response for those who test positive Meanwhile, the economic fallout and the pandemic continue to spread. Sean Caleb, CGTN in Washington.
Italy, the centre of Europe's coronavirus pandemic, has reported 1,016 deaths since mid-February, and the total number of confirmed cases has reached more than 15,000. Italy has since tightened its nationwide lockdown, with all non-essential shops and services ordered to close. CGTN's Ross Cullen reports now from Rome.
Italians have grown used to unprecedented measures being imposed. We had a national shutdown of schools, we had a regional lockdown of parts of the north, and then the national quarantine period that came into effect all citizens. But the imposition of a ban now of all non-essential services, bars, restaurants, cafes, hairdressers, for example, cannot open for at least 2 weeks. We haven't seen anything like this when it comes to the global response fighting the coronavirus pandemic. It's going to be affecting all aspects of daily life. The streets here in Rome are much quieter as traffic is reduced. People are not out and about. They are following the government's advice. Giuseppe Conte published his decree, which he called Io resto a casa, I stay at home, urging people to work together to fight this by reducing social contact, staying at home, working from home, and also trying to contain the spread of the coronavirus by shutting bars and restaurants. Italy is suffering from the highest number of cases in Europe and the second highest number of fatalities from this outside China. The healthcare system is particularly under strain, overburdened as well with these high numbers, and these measures imposed by the government are aimed at reducing the spread of the coronavirus and reducing the pressure on the healthcare system, on the structure of healthcare overall, and the numbers of doctors and nurses that are feeling the strain as they deal with these rising number of cases in Italy. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Rome.
In the past few days, the sporting world has been heavily affected with the coronavirus outbreak. This has led to major sporting events either continuing without spectators, getting postponed, or even being cancelled. CGTN's Laura Walabengo takes a look at some of the effects the virus has had on the global sporting scene.
In a span of 5 days, major competitions in the world of sport have called off their tournaments as a way of containing the deadly virus that has now claimed over 4,600 lives globally.
Events over the last few days have been moving incredibly quickly, and the Australian Grand Prix Corporation has been obviously reacting and responding to those issues. To our race fans, I'd like to say we're terribly disappointed that the event can't go ahead. The reasons for that are well known, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that shortly. But from the Australian Grand Prix point of view, just want to say sorry to our fans, and the health and safety and welfare of the teams and people, the community generally has to take precedence, and it will and has. And we look forward to hopefully being able to run this event at some later stage. We'll just have to wait and see.
In Europe, UEFA postponed next week's Champions League matches as a way of containing coronavirus. In the leagues, the Spanish La Liga has called off matches for at least 2 weeks as they assess the situation, whereas Juventus has quarantined their entire squad after defender Daniele Rugani tested positive for coronavirus on Wednesday. Elsewhere, the English Premier League is set to hold a meeting on Friday as they discuss the way forward for the league. This is after Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta and Chelsea winger Hudson Odoi tested positive for coronavirus. Other sports have also been heavily impacted, with the ATP and WTA suspending the professional tennis tour for 6 weeks. However, despite all the cancellation and postponements of major events, Japan still remains adamant that the Olympics will go ahead as planned.
I'm aware of President Trump's remarks. IOC and Tokyo 2020 organizers are not at all considering cancelling or postponing the Games. I've heard that they will be proceeding with preparations for safe and secure Games as planned towards the opening day on July 24th.
In Africa, no major continental sporting events have been called off, with 14 countries already being affected by coronavirus. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is in Oyo in the Republic of Congo to discuss the ongoing unrest in Libya. Ramaphosa is there in his capacity as chairperson of the African Union. He's made the trip at the invitation of the Central African country's leader, Denis Sassou Nguesso. Nguesso invited the AU chair in order to hold crisis talks over Libya's civil war, which has seen violence between warring factions escalate in recent months. CGTN's Yolisa Njumela has more.
This is an inaugural meeting of the African Union Contact Group on Libya. Its main aim is to deal with the ongoing strife in Libya by playing an active role in finding peaceful solutions. The Contact Group will also provide political leadership and promote the coordination of international efforts in pursuit of a lasting solution.
The compliance of what has been said and the commitment taken for the actors in this conflict remain the golden rule. I reiterate the commitment of high-level committee in enforcing the route map on Libya as the main objective to holding arms, including inter-Libyan reconciliation conference.
Libya has been torn by fighting between rival factions since 2011. Since the AU summit in February in Addis Ababa, the situation in that country has escalated.
The ongoing strife in Libya has dangerous repercussions for the security and stability not only of the region, but the continent in general. Furthermore, continued political and military interference by external actors in the affairs of Libya continue to undermine the fundamental interests as well as the rights of the Libyan people and their aspirations for freedom, peace, democracy, and development.
Ramaphosa says there's a growing concern for the impact the crisis is having in that country.
As the African Union, we note with mounting concern the devastating impact of the conflict on the lives of Libyan civilians, particularly on women and children.
The African Union Group wants the warring parties to urgently commit to a ceasefire and work towards securing a political agreement. The AU Contact Group further emphasized that all parties in Libya should commit to a dialogue and that there can be no military solution to the conflict in that country. Yolisa Njomela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, for more on this, we are now joined live by CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy in Brazzaville for us. Daniel, what came out of the African Union Contact Group on Libya meeting in Brazzaville?
Well, thank you very much, Karen. Yes, the meeting is being held here in Congo, Brazzaville's northern city of Oyo. And one of the key issues that the leaders who are part of this contact group under the African Union that was set up in the just concluded African Union Summit in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, this particular contact group was set up, to ensure that there is international coordination to find lasting solutions to the conflict in Libya. But one of the key issues that the delegates discussed here in Brazzaville is that you cannot solve the crisis in Libya using military means. They are saying that the crisis in Libya must be resolved through peaceful means. And what President Cyril Ramaphosa is saying is that community leaders must be brought together, political leaders must come together to ensure that they find an amicable solution to this crisis, which they say now is not only a problem that Libya as a country is experiencing, but it is presenting a wider problem to the entire continent of Africa as a whole.
And Daniel, you mentioned one key issue discussed there. What about others? Cyril Ramaphosa evidently is very concerned about external actors involved in Libya's crisis.
Yes, that came out very strongly from President Cyril Ramaphosa, that the continued political and military interference by external actors in Libya is not making things in this country any better at all. So they're saying that countries that have interest in Libya must desist. They must leave the Libyan people to resolve their own problem with a homegrown solution. So until that is done. Now, we don't know how the African Union is going to rally support from the various countries within this particular region, including the Sahel region, to try and address the problem of Libya with homegrown solutions. So until that happens, we may continue seeing the crisis in Libya continuing. But they're saying that we cannot send in military operation in Libya. We cannot use political means to resolve this crisis. Nations must sit together, communities must sit together to ensure that the crisis in Libya is solved amicably.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy there in Brazzaville following the African Union contact group meeting to discuss the crisis in Libya. Moving on to other news now, Egypt has shut down schools and universities across the country as it braces for a huge storm. The government has also given public and private sector workers a day off. A series of thunder and sandstorms, said to be the strongest in 25 years, is expected to affect the country for more than 3 days. CGTN's Adel El Mahrouki reports.
Egypt's sunshine vanished and Cairo's heavy traffic disappeared. In the Egyptian capital, 85 water pumping vehicles have been deployed to frequently drain rainwater from the streets. Municipalities are on their highest alert. The country has partially shut down, and the government has advised citizens to remain at home as the toughest storm in decades hit.
The wind activities, which could reach a sandstorm, will lead to limited vision on highways. The wind could make billboards on trees fall. That is why we have indicated these conditions as dangerous, and we do not recommend people to go out unless it's an emergency. So far, there's no effect on flight schedules. They are resuming normally. If horizontal vision decreases, some flights may get delayed.
Sandstorms from the south are colliding with thunderstorms from the north. These extreme weather conditions will continue until Saturday.
It's a deep trough coming from Sudan. The atmospheric pressure at its center is extremely low. It's called the Sudanese seasonal trough. It hits Egypt via southern eastern wind, loaded with huge volume of water vapors. It will join a similar northern eastern wind current. The clash of these two storms will lead to extremely heavy rain.
This week, floods are expected to hit Suez, Sinai, and Upper Egypt. Some highways have been locked as fears of traffic accidents increase.
Egypt has never seen such a storm in over 2 decades. The last time a similar storm has hit was in 1994. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
We've got all the business news coming up for you after the break, including shareholders report continued losses as more countries report new cases of the coronavirus. And Zimbabwe moves to undo the controversial land reform program it implemented 2 decades ago.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector. Problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Stocks across the continent continue trading in loss territory as panic drives investors to pull out their money. In Kenya, where a first case was reported earlier, all stocks are trading lower, extending losses reported on Thursday when markets in Nigeria and Kenya closed over 3% lower. Nigeria's bourse is back to levels last seen in early 2016, and the Kenyan market was last at these levels in late 2003. In the last 7 trading sessions, nearly $5 billion has been trimmed off its market cap. Its shares hit a 21-year low today, falling by as much as 42%. This is the worst week since it listed in 1989. In Asia, shares have mostly extended losses from Europe and Wall Street in what has been a roller coaster session. European shares tumbled overnight on Thursday. The UK's FTSE 100 plunged 10.9%. The German DAX and the French CAC 40 both fell by more than 12%. In terms of other Asian benchmarks, South Korea's Kospi shed 3.4%. Shares in New Zealand tumbled nearly 5%. Bucking the regional trend, though, was Australia's ASX 200, which jumped over 4% after an extremely volatile session. Earlier on Thursday, Wall Street experienced a second trading halt this week as stocks plunged to their worst levels in over 3 decades. John Terrett has more from New York.
The story of the Thursday session in New York was that the markets were reacting to the European travel ban imposed by President Trump and what they see as total inaction in Washington, D.C. The day got underway by stopping within a very short order. The S&P 500, the broad market, with 505 stocks in it, stopping for the second time in a week because the market had gone down by 7%. So the circuit breakers kicked in, everybody waited for 15 minutes, and when the market came back up again, it continued to fall. The focus now is on a possible credit crunch involving companies. It began on Wednesday with Boeing borrowing a large line of credit in order, apparently, just to keep going. The Federal Reserve in New York and Washington, D.C. acted aggressively on Thursday to refloat the Treasury and the bond markets to make sure that people could continue to go ahead and borrow. But the problem is now deeper than that, because pretty much all Major League sport in the United States has been cancelled or is about to be cancelled. Here in New York, Broadway is packing up its stuff and going home for a couple of weeks, so there'll be no shows on the Great White Way. A state of emergency has been imposed by the mayor of New York City. As you know, the St. Patrick's Day parade has been cancelled for next Tuesday. You have the 3 New York markets now down 25% from their all-time highs. The S&P 500 down 14% in just a week. John Terrett, CGTN, on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Recession fears also weighed on commodities, even the usual safe haven of gold. The Saudi-Russia standoff and epidemic scare continue to drag major crude futures today. Brent crude was trading over $36 per barrel. That was after touching an intraday low of less than $33 in Asian morning trade. West Texas Intermediate opened below $31 per barrel and has struggled to get back above the $32 level. Gold futures had increased as a safe haven asset amid the recent turbulence. But this week they started to fall day by day on the New York Mercantile Exchange to below $1,600 an ounce. Some analysts believe investors are selling gold to raise cash and make up for their losses on equities. The Tanzanian Tourist Board is feeling the impact of the coronavirus outbreak in the tourism sector. Because of this outbreak, direct flights from the country's capital, Dar es Salaam, to Guangzhou in China have been cancelled. Tourism promotional plans have been postponed. However, the board is confident that this is just a short-term situation and a response plan has been set up to cope with the situation. Tourism is one of the main sectors that Tanzania depends on for economic growth. Recent statistics mention tourism as the leading contributor of foreign currency and contributes 17% of Tanzanian GDP.
Tourism is a major sector in Tanzania. And it's one of the leading sectors that brings a lot of income to Tanzania. Right now, tourists are not comfortable to travel out of their countries. Some countries have put restrictions for people to travel out of their countries, and that will affect the global tourism industry. Tanzania being one of the key countries receiving quite a number of tourists from all over the world, definitely we will see numbers drop because of the outbreak.
Tunisia could take advantage of crashing oil prices as world demand drops due to the spread of the coronavirus. On Monday, crude oil futures plummeted by more than 30% at the open, the biggest one-day drop since the 1991 Gulf War. And experts now say Tunisia can seize the opportunity and save hundreds of millions in foreign exchange. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
Analysts at the Finance Commission at Parliament say relevant authorities can secure new contracts for oil supplies. The 2020 state budget was based on the assumption that oil barrel prices would be at $65, but prices have dropped by more than 40% this week.
This measure will benefit the country. The price of a barrel of oil has crashed and will certainly remain low for some time, until the end of the coronavirus crisis in the world. Tunisia can seize this opportunity and save hundreds of millions in foreign exchange by making a strategic and cheap reserve.
The country's premier Elias Farfer said Tunisia could take advantage of the situation. However, he pointed out that market instability could have negative repercussions.
Yes, our economy can benefit from the current oil prices, but the drop could also negatively affect the world growth rate and consequently the Tunisian economy.
Farfer said it's too early to speculate about the economic consequences of the coronavirus outbreak.
We cannot to date assess the impact of the spread of this epidemic on the national economy, since we are also currently in the middle of the situation and the data is not yet accurate.
Fuel subsidies account for 45% of Tunisia's subsidy budget 2020. That represents 14.8% of management expenditure, 8.9% of the overall state budget, and 3.3% of the country's GDP. Market analysts maintain that following the COVID-19 outbreak, demand for oil has largely plunged as a result of softened industrial output, as well as the huge decline in the airline and travel industry. In fact, thousands of flights have been cancelled globally. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Zimbabwe is moving to undo the controversial land reform program it implemented 2 decades ago. The government has gazetted a new legislation under which former landowners may opt for repossession or monetary compensation. These new regulations will apply to both indigenous farmers whose farms were appropriated, as well as to those whose land was protected by bilateral treaties. CGTN's Farai Mwakatuya reports now from Harare.
Several black farmers who lost their land amidst some of the chaotic fast-track land grabs are to be reinstated on their farms or compensated, as are several white farmers who were protected by international treaties.
And Zimbabwe did sign those BIPAs, the bilateral investment protection agreements with the Netherlands, Germany. There's quite a few countries. And yet, some of those BIPA farms were compulsorily acquired. So the government is now saying that was an error. That land should not have been compulsorily acquired because it was protected by an existing agreement. So that land would have to be compensated for. I don't know whether some of them it may be difficult to actually have the original land back, but certainly compensation will be due.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government has said there is no going back on the land reform. It set aside funds to pay former white farmers for improvements they made on the land. The plan to compensate owners of erroneously acquired land is seen as yet another step by the government to rebuild international relations at a time the country is trying to boost its agricultural output. In February, it announced plans to reduce farm sizes so as to free up land for more beneficiaries and improve productivity. The measures are also a response to years of sustained economic challenges that have led to high unemployment.
A country or economy is labor surplus. Farmers will get smaller. It's only when an economy now absorbs that labor into a manufacturing industrial economy that you suck the people out of the rural areas. The farms get bigger, then you don't have to subdivide them, you actually consolidate.
After an initial slump, following the land reforms, Zimbabwe's agricultural sector had been on an upward trajectory that's recently been interrupted by 2 consecutive droughts which have slashed harvests, leaving millions food insecure. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Egypt will start printing polymer banknotes in a move expected to save the country money in the long run. The new banknotes are expected to last longer than paper currency. The Central Bank of Egypt says it'll print the plastic notes at its new facility in the new administrative capital near to Cairo. CGTN's Adel El Mahrouhi reports.
For years, the IMF has been saying the future of banknotes is plastic, but few countries have opted for the new currency. This week, Egypt has confirmed that it will join those nations that have gone for the option.
There's a global trend to replace paper banknotes with plastic. This convergence leads to many benefits. They are easier in recycling, so it's environmental friendly. It's more expensive to print, but it has a much longer lifespan. Also, the probability of forging it is much lower than paper banknotes.
The Central Bank of Egypt expects the cycle of its new banknotes to be triple that of paper. After some studies, the CBE is settled to begin with the £10 note. It's roughly worth 64 US cents.
The £10 note is the least monetary unit that the government can print. Less values can be covered by coins. The £10 note is also the most common in the market. It represents the highest volume of printed money under the £100 note. The 10 banknote is only the first stage. The other notes will follow in a timeline which the central bank will announce after the launch of the new note.
Besides being harder to counterfeit, polymer banknotes have a major economic benefit. The Central Bank of Egypt will eventually print its currency fewer times, saving the foreign currency used to import raw material for its press. And the polymer notes have a lower risk of transmitting disease, leading to reduced health costs.
On a rainy day, the new Egyptian £10 will definitely be more practical than this old one. The Central Bank of Egypt says it will start printing this new note by the end of the year. It will be printed at its new facility in the new administrative capital. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including meet the Nigerian who's a doctor by day and an artist by night.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
First, a recap of our top story where Kenya has confirmed its first coronavirus case. The country's Health Cabinet Secretary, Mutahi Kagwe, on Friday said the patient is a 27-year-old Kenyan who travelled from the US via London. He said that although the patient, a Kenyan, is stable and eating, she will not be released from hospital until she is confirmed negative. The woman is at Kenyatta National Hospital's infectious disease unit.
The case is a Kenya citizen who traveled back to Nairobi, returning from the United States of America via London, United Kingdom, on the 5th of March 2020. She was confirmed positive by the National Influenza Center Laboratory at the National Public Health Laboratories of the Ministry of Health. I would like to add here, however, the patient is stable. Her temperature has gone down to normal. She is behaving normally. She is eating, but she cannot be released until the tests continue, until she gets negative. But as far as her state is concerned, the lady is okay.
Doctor by day and artist by night. That's the story of one young Nigerian who is both a medical doctor and a visual artist. Adefemi Gabadamosi, popularly known by his art signature, Fola David, uses his art to try to instill self-love and self-confidence in people with different types of skin condition. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more.
His works are as stunning as they are lifelike. Here, the image of a boy with vitiligo. And then this one, a young lady with stretch marks. All the details intricately accentuated. They are the works of Dr. Adefemi Gbadamosi, better known as Fola David. When he is not at the hospital attending to his patients, this is where you'll find a general practitioner, at his studio where he brings art to life. With skillful strokes of his pen, Fola David puts finishing touches to a drawing of a pregnant woman, adding naturally occurring stretch marks to her belly. He's become an internet sensation for his unique art style, painting people just as they are with several skin conditions. For him, art isn't perfection, but truth.
I've worked in dermatology, and that was where I began to see the different types of skin, changes that could happen, and I saw how it affected people. I found a lot of them fascinating, actually, not from a medical standpoint. I decided to, make an artwork of this, and that's what I started doing.
Fola David calls his brand of art hyperrealism, focusing on skin conditions like stretch marks, vitiligo, freckles, among others. He says his aim is to celebrate the human skin and restore self-esteem in people who have skin conditions.
I want to tell people the true story, show the true skin, and also encourage people to live in that manner and not be dictated by how the world wants to see people. I don't want people to feel that burden, to feel that pressure. Feel okay with what you have, and don't let it affect your mindset, don't let it affect you mentally.
In addition to being a hyper-realist artist, Fola David is also one of Nigeria's foremost speed painters. In just about 5 minutes, he'd painted prominent personalities, including presidents, governors, and music stars, an art that leaves live audiences in awe of his talent. An example is this speed painting of Jeb Bush, the 43rd governor of the U.S. state of Florida. Even Bush himself was left in awe at the finished work, which was done right in his presence and in just about 7 minutes.
I make an image less than 5 minutes and I'm seeing a crowd of 4,000, 5,000 people jumping. It's very amazing. I just stay in my small cubicle making these works, and people from all over the world are really touched by what I do. And it's really where a lot of encouragement comes from.
Fola David's goal is not just build self-esteem in sufferers of skin conditions, but to also impact the larger society by shaping their perspective and creating acceptance through his art. He's already collaborating with dermatological societies to do this, and is reaching a larger audience through international exhibitions. So much for this medical doctor and visual artist. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All the sport coming up for you after the break. Don't go away.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In European football, Nigerian Odion Ighalo scored a superb goal as United thrashed Austrian side LASK 5-0. Ighalo, who is on loan from Shanghai Shenhua, fired a thunderbolt from outside the box after skillfully juggling the ball with both feet. After the break, Daniel James doubled the results before Juan Mata scored the third in the 82nd minute. Substitutes Mason Greenwood and then Andreas Pereira scored in extra time to give United a huge lead heading into the second leg at Old Trafford. United boss Ole Gunnar Solskjaer says playing behind closed doors will need some getting used to, but praised his players for being